everybody, and welcome to this demo session about Packer on Baremetal Cloud. My name is Johan Lamoureux. I'm a solution architect at OVHCloud. I'm quite sure you already heard about infra-as-code and are often of some of tools which are used in this context, like Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Terraform. Today, let's focus on a special one called Packer. Packer is a tool for building identical images for multiple platforms from a single source of configuration. It's also called creating a golden image, a master, or templates. It's based on different templates of configuration until call different builders, which call different hypervisors, platform, or something like that, and could create images and have different output to be reused on any platform. The core of Packers is code on Golang, meaning it can be used on any kind of platform like Linux, macOS, and even Windows. The idea is to use a Baremetal cloud as an image factory. So we use a physical node, meaning it's OS agnostic. We are the root access, and we are able to deploy any kind of hypervisors. On this demo, we will use vSphere ESXi to build different images, a CentOS images, and a Windows one. The idea is to export those images to an OVA format to be able to reuse it on a vSphere platform for several deployments through other tools like Ansible and Terraform. For this kind of setup, we have to deploy a Baremetal server connected to the VRAC, and we will use an instances on OpenStack to run the Packer. Packer do not directly execute the provisioning step on the hypervisors. You call it through different APIs. The instance also acts as a DHCP server for the provision in images and provides the internet access to download packets like that. The main aspect is Packer requires some hack or some specific configuration on the ESXi, which reduce the security level. That's why we do not use the public access on the Baremetal nodes. Let's see how to use them on Baremetal Cloud. All right. On the right, we have our ESXi console called DCV, on which we have created several power groups. So we have the famous VM networks used on different virtual switch. This virtual switch consumes the NIC connected to the VRAC. So it do not consume directly internet ports. And we have also assigned a VLAN ID to be able to communicate with the Packer instances. We also define a data store called data stores 1, where all the provisioning will be made and be used to store the image, VMDK, and so on. On the Linux boxes, let's see the code. Packer use up to now some JSON file to define the provision. Let's look at the CentOS one. On the templates, we have a definition of a builder. So we will use with the ESXi builder called VMware ISO. We also define the communicators. It will use SSH, and it is the only way to communicate with ESXi. We do not use any kind of APIs. We also define the information to be able to communicate with these boxes. I will explain where I set up this value. We also plan to export, after the building, the images to a format called OVA. Some information about if I would like to keep the VM registered on the provisioning boxes, and if I would like to skip the export. Packer will execute some command on the console to initialize the boot sequence. So we'll see later on the configuration. It also pushes some files for the configuration, be able to do that. For the CentOS one, we'll use a specific kickstart, and we will use a floppy disk to provide this file to the VM. After that, we will configure some physical information like the disk size and also the memory and the CPU and also network configuration. Sorry. So we will connect the VM to the VM networks. We will use the VMX3 drivers, and I will also define the Baremetal ESXi drivers connections. The builders is the first step, and after that we will call a provisioner. The provisioner will connect to the VM which has been created from the ISO. So we directly download the ISO from the website. We also include the checksum to ensure that the downloaded information is reliable. And we will execute on the fresh new VM some script like pushing SSH key and also do some cleanups from the installation phases to have the smallest VMs for exporting. Now, let's see on different variables available. So on the var files, we'll CentOS minimal. I define the host name for this VM, different information to be able to collect or to download the images. Also, I record the ISO checksum. And the most important one is a root command sequence. So directly typing by Packer on the ESXi boxes on the console, and it indicates to initial the kickstart with the famous kickstart file push and present on the floppy disk. But it's not the only file I have for this. I will separate in another file all the information on the remote host, mean how to connect to the ESXi host. I define the remote type as ESXi5, even if it's 6.7 hosted. The IP address or DNS name, ports, users and password, and also the remote data store name. Then we will be able to launch the building. If you have several builders defining the templates, you should consider to only define one at a time to be sure that the provisioning is done. Or if you need to speed up, you could run several builders in parallel in different platforms. So just copy paste this long command. So we call Packer build. So we call it to build an images. I pass several variable file. The first one is to get the information on the boxes used for the creation. Then the variables, that's the right one. Sorry. So we call Packer with the build command with several variable files. First is the ESXi Packer JSON used to connect to the ESXi for the provisioning. The second one is the CentOS minimal to define how to download the ISO, the boot command, and so on. And we call a generic templates previously displayed. And Packer will replace all the user variable by the one provided on this kind of files. Let's run the building. So first step, you will download from internet the ISO directly. You will also check the checksum. Be sure that you download the right images and is accurate. Now, as it already push the images on the boxes, you will reuse it. It just push the floppy with a different version. And if we look at the VM on the ESXi box, we thought that it creates the CentOS set virtual machine. and it waits the different status to be able to type the boot sequence to indicate the kickstart file and continue the provisioning. If we look at the configuration, we have the one vCPU, the memory disk, and we are connected to the VM network. As you can see, we have a floppy on this VM called Packer with numbers, which is generated by Packer to pass the kickstart. We have also the ISO pushed by Packer. It's not reusing the official name, but it's used with the hash to be sure that it will already control the download. And then the kickstart is called, as we can see in the background, and Packer will wait SSH to be available to continue with the provisioning. Okay, so the provisioning phase is done. So the box has been created. As we can see, we have installed some package. This is the provisioning script called. So if you see some red, it's just because, okay, task can be done on these boxes, but not a blocker. After that, it will gracefully stop the VM, then deleting some logs and export the VM. So on our boxes, we'll discover an OVA in the output files. We will see the export task is running, and then we can reuse this OVA on several platforms, ESXi, vCenter, and so on. And the build is done. If you look on the output VMware ISO folder, we'll see the OVA files. And if I give you details with H for the table, it's just a few megabytes, less than 1 gigabyte of as a size. Even if during the provisioning phases, we define a disk of 8 gigs for the VMs. So we really compress, or with the cleanup and before the export, it will clean up as much as possible the space to reduce the size. Now, let's see how to do the same thing with Windows. Same things, quite similar. We just define some sensible variable to not display this variable in the output of the log. We define a builders, same kind, VMware ISO. We find also the different variables to connect to the ESXi voice. We expect having an OVA. Just indicate to keep the VM registered. That's why you will find, you will see again, or still see the CentOS boxes on the ESXi, but I skip the export to speed up the process, but it's the same process. We use several floppy files, the famous auto unintended XML to pass to the VMware installer all the information, which disk, etc. I also add 2 files, in fact 2 folders, which contain drivers. The drivers for the VM Mixnet 3 and the paravirtual ESXi drivers. On the hardware, CPU, memory, and disk size is defined in other variable files. We download the ISO from a remote location, and for the communicator, we use different interfaces. As the SSH is not available, we use the Windows remote management interfaces And we'll also pass the username and password for communicate and open the communication. After the building phases, I'll also call some provisioner. The first one, it's a script, PowerShell script, installs the VMware tools. And after that, several scripts, for example, for bootstrapping the Windows, doing some configuration and optimization. Script to remove, for example, default application, install the cloud base, set up, configure the Windows remote management for Ansible, and a cleanup. Same thing again to reduce the disk size. Also define some timeouts are important for the Windows building. Now let's look on the variable files. So the ESXi is called none. So I will use the Windows one. So the Windows version is 2019. I define the host name, the Windows admin password, CPU mem, CPU to vCPU, 4 gigs of memory, 65 gigs for the disk size, and different description and annotations. Now, let's call Packer to build these boxes. So again, we call Packer build, pass two variables. First one to be able to connect to the ESXi, the other file to define some parameters on the VM, and a generic templates, which is filled with the value extracting from the variable files. Let's run it. Again, you will download the ISO from remote sources, then push it to the boxes and initialize the building of the Windows images. So it will push, the ISO on the boxes, generate the floppy, push it on the ESXi, and as we can see, create the VM, start it. Look on it, Windows boot on the ISO, and we use the auto-annotated XML files to answer all the questions for the installation. Okay, so Packer building phases has been done. Now pass to the provisioning steps. As you can see, it's connected through Windows remote command, and it now has installed the VMware tools and do the other stuff. Don't see the VMware tool status audited right now, because even if it's installed, it's not started yet. At the end, it will shut down the VM. And again, try to compact the virtual machine before exporting them. And it's done. We have skipped the export of the virtual machine and to speed up the process. But we keep the virtual machine registered at the ESXi host. If you would like, for example, to inspect the building phases, debug, and so on. Thank you for joining this demo session. I'm available in the chat if you have any question. Have a good day. Bye-bye.